I leave Immanuel on the board to remind us that what we're doing is about him. That's where we begin, that's where we're in the middle, that's where we end. So I want to just talk about Immanuel approach, because that's really what we're doing. The Immanuel approach is what Dr. Karl Lehman has developed, that God has given him. I think just he's put his brain science and his Christianity and his psychiatry together and come up with what we're doing. And it is a wonderful gathering of those disciplines. I'm calling what you're doing Immanuel Practicum. Practicum means how to do it, and so I'm calling it Immanuel Practicum rather than Immanuel Approach Practicum, which seems like a lot of words. Just Immanuel Practicum. And where this came from was that I started working with Dr. Karl when he was developing Immanuel Approach, and people around me started seeing me change and said, "What are you doing?" And when I showed them what I was doing by doing a session with them and whatnot, there's a longer story there, but they said to me, you've got to share this with people. And so they started inviting me to their little groups, and I started trying to explain what was happening to me. And what I wanted to do is to help people duplicate what I was getting from Karl. And so I called it Immanuel Practicum. This is how you do the Immanuel approach. And in the meantime, Karl had written Outsmarting Yourself, which I think I showed you last time. He had written Outsmarting Yourself, which is really the theory behind the practicum. And so people were taking little pieces of it and sticking it into what they were doing, but they weren't able to duplicate what Karl was doing because it wasn't written anywhere. They didn't know what to do. So it just made sense to say, oh, well, I think whatever I'm doing, I'm going to start with a positive memory, or whatever I'm doing, I'm going to have a safety net, or whatever I'm doing. And so we started to get all kinds of anomalies, and everybody called what they were doing the Immanuel approach. If you get on the website and look up Immanuel approach, you're going to see some very, very, very different things. And so part of what I'm doing out here is I'm standardizing the Immanuel approach. And so the invitation is for you to follow the model that I'm giving you. So some people call it Immanuel Prayer. You'll hear people say that too. The Immanuel Prayer. And some people, St. Louis in particular that I know of, call it IP. You'll hear all these, but if it's Immanuel Practicum, that's what Karl taught me.